Settle in and let your breathing slow, because tonight the story begins in a house that looks perfectly safe. A little wind at the windows, soft lamplight in the hallway, and the gentle confidence of people who think bedtime means the world has agreed to behave. You think this is going to be loud, dramatic, obvious. It is not. It starts with a quiet absence and a few ordinary things left behind, waiting to be misunderstood. In this long, slow walk through the Lindbergh Kidnapping and a few other boring crimes after it, you follow the same tired comfort I always return to as the Sleepless Detective: notes, footprints, timelines, and the patient way the truth finally shows itself. You are standing in a house that money built to feel invincible. But money does not stop cold air, and it does not stop a determined person with time. It is the evening of Thursday, March 1st, 1932, in East Amwell, New Jersey, at the Lindbergh home, a place locals call Highfields. The world knows the name Lindbergh the way it knows thunder. Charles Lindbergh is not just a man, he is a headline that learned to walk. The baby upstairs is famous by association, like a shadow with a press agent. And tonight, in the nursery, everything is supposed to be routine. A child put down, a lamp turned low, a quiet house settling into its familiar creaks. You move through that hallway in the soft light, and the first thing you notice is how normal it looks. That is always the insult of it. Crime scenes rarely announce themselves with sirens. They start with a feeling, the kind you get when you reach for a light switch and your fingers touch a wall that should not be there. Sometime after 9 o'clock, the household realizes something is wrong. The child is not where he should be, not in the crib, not tucked behind a blanket, not in a sleepy nurse's arms, just missing. The air in the room changes, and it changes fast, because silence can be loud when it is the wrong silence. You think at first, the way people always think at first, maybe he was moved. Maybe someone is playing a strange, exhausted prank. Maybe the nurse misunderstood. Maybe the parents misheard. Your mind reaches for explanations that let you keep the world intact. But then you see it, the thing that makes your stomach go a little cold. A note. It is not romantic. It is not cinematic. It is a piece of paper that looks like it was handled too much, like someone folded and unfolded it while trying to be brave. It is left behind in a way that feels almost polite, and that politeness is what makes it frightening. A criminal who leaves a note is telling you they have a plan, or at least they want you to believe they do. The first assumption forms quickly because humans hate empty space. Kidnapping. Ransom. A clean escape into the dark. It fits the note sitting there like a dull weight. It fits the era too, a time when the country is struggling through the Depression, when the idea of a rich man being targeted feels almost inevitable, not justified, but predictable. And in the first hours, nothing is clean. People talk over one another. People run up and down stairs. People touch door handles and windows and blankets. Worry has hands, and worry does not wear gloves. You stand there and watch the house become crowded with intention. The nurse, the family, staff, neighbors, then police, then more police. Then men who know the Lindbergh name means this will not stay inside these walls. The house feels warm, but the night outside is not. Wind moves through the trees around Highfields. Somewhere out beyond the lit windows, the world is empty and wide. That is the thin line, the warm bubble of a home, and the dark that presses against it. Patient as a debt, the nursery is upstairs. The window is part of the story now, whether it deserves to be or not. You look at it the way detectives look at everything after the fact, not as a window, but as a question. Was it opened? Was it forced? Was it used? Was it staged? And there is another detail, down below the window, outside, something that does not belong in a well-kept yard, a ladder. It is made of wood, ordinary wood, the kind of thing you might use to fix a gutter, or paint a high wall, or pretend you are a man who does his own repairs. But this ladder is positioned like a sentence. Someone brought it here, set it, climbed it, and left it behind like a signature. The first hours are not heroic. They are administrative chaos wrapped in fear. Someone calls the police. Someone calls friends. Someone calls anyone who might help. And as soon as the call goes out, the case stops being private. That is the curse of famous victims. The tragedy belongs to everyone, and everyone feels entitled to participate. You find yourself doing what you always do, trying to preserve a timeline before it melts. Who last saw the child? What time? Who checked? What time? What was heard? What was not heard? And the answers are soft, because memory is soft under stress. People do not store details neatly when they are scared. They store feelings. They store impressions. They store the shape of their own panic. The nurse, Betty Gow, had been caring for the baby. The child had a cold, you learn, and the family had moved his sleeping arrangements to the upstairs nursery at Highfields. That matters later, because crime loves routines, and it loves changes in routine even more. A household with steady habits is easier to study. A household with sudden changes is easier to exploit. In the early assumption, you imagine a simple break-in, a quick climb, a quiet hand, lifting a sleeping child, a retreat into the trees. You picture a man moving like smoke, but you should already be suspicious of simplicity, because simplicity is what people tell themselves when they cannot bear the alternative, that someone took time, watched the house, learned the habits, and moved with confidence. That kind of confidence is never random. And yet, in this moment, you are still at the beginning, when everyone wants to believe the child is alive and recoverable. That belief is not evidence. It is a need. It drives decisions. The note becomes the anchor. You read it carefully, because paper is one of the few things in a case that does not forget what it saw. It demands money. Ransom. A specific amount, written in a way that suggests the writer thinks about money like an object, not like a number in an account. It includes strange symbols, a kind of mark meant to prove authenticity later. And the language is both careful and wrong. It is English, but it is English with a limp. It is the kind of writing that makes you hear an accent even when no one is speaking. Words are misspelled, grammar is off, phrases feel borrowed, like someone learned them from listening rather than reading. You do not say it out loud yet, because people hate hearing what you are thinking, but you think it anyway. Whoever wrote this note wanted to sound intimidating, and also wanted to sound like the kind of person you would not easily trace. That is a delicate balance. Most criminals are not delicate people. Now you go back to the ladder, because the ladder is honest. It is too heavy to lie. A ladder has weight, length, design. It was built, not grabbed in a rush. It is made of sections like someone wanted it to be portable. That means planning. It means a person who thought about getting it to the property without drawing attention. And wood carries stories if you know how to listen. Tool marks, nail patterns, the type of lumber, the way it is joined. It is not magic, it is carpentry, which means somewhere there is a carpenter's habit hiding inside this crime. You walk the yard and you look at the ground like it is a page. In good conditions, soil holds footprints. In bad conditions, it holds suggestions. The night has wind, and the ground is not a perfect record keeper, but you still look. You find impressions, a disturbance. You do not get a perfect shoe print gift wrapped for you, because real cases do not do that. But you get enough to know someone stood there, moved there, carried something, and then, because this is a famous home, and because humans love to help the way dogs love to bark, the scene begins to fill. Men step where they should not step. They pick up what they should not pick up. They talk loudly about what they think happened, like their opinions are tools. Congratulations, the crime scene is now a community project. This is where the boring part begins and where real detective work lives. It is not the chase, it is not the confrontation, it is the quiet effort to separate what happened from what people did afterward. You try to identify who was where, who entered the nursery, who handled the note, who touched the window, who walked outside near the ladder. Every new person adds fingerprints you did not ask for. Every well-meaning gesture is another smudge on the glass. The state police arrive, local police. Eventually, federal attention circles, because the victim is famous and because ransom crossing state lines begins to matter in the way paperwork matters. In the early phase, though, no one is thinking about federal jurisdiction. They are thinking about a baby in the dark. They are thinking about what you would do if you had a child missing from the next room. You would do something, anything, because doing nothing feels like agreeing with the universe. Charles Lindbergh himself becomes part of the response, and that adds a strange pressure. He is disciplined, used to control, used to making decisions. But this is not an airplane you can land by willpower. This is a crime, and crime does not respect status. Still, Lindbergh's involvement shapes choices. It shapes who gets trusted. It shapes the tone, the urgency, the secrecy in some places, and the loudness in others. In a regular kidnapping, police would push for certain controls. In this one, control is shared, and shared control is messy. You go back upstairs again, you look at the crib, the bedding, the room, you look for anything that indicates struggle, noise, interruption. But in many child abductions, especially when a child is very young, there is no struggle in the room. The child is taken as an object. That is a hard sentence, but it is accurate. It makes the whole event feel ghost-like. A child can disappear without a sound. That is part of why these cases haunt people. There is no fight to anchor your anger, only absence. The window, you look at it again. If the ladder was used, then the window is a portal. You check the sill, you check for marks, scratches, disturbed dust, a latch that looks wrong. Here is the part that does not feel like fiction. Windows in real homes are imperfect. They stick, they rattle, they have old paint, they have warped wood. A criminal climbing in and out is dealing with those small, annoying realities. And those realities leave traces. You note what you can. But you also know something else. This house is now crowded. Every minute that passes is another minute of evidence, drying, smearing, vanishing. Outside, the ladder sits like a prop that no one wants to touch and everyone wants to examine. Eventually, it is collected, bagged, handled. The way you handle a thing that might be the only honest witness you have. The note is guarded, copied, studied. It becomes an artifact passed between hands that pretend they are careful. And the whole time, the world outside the property begins to wake up to the story. Reporters will come, phone calls will come, letters will come, offers to help, offers to profit, offers to pray, and with them, an avalanche of noise. But right now, you are still in the first hours when the house smells like warm wood and lamp oil, and the fear is still sharp enough to cut. You try to keep the early assumptions from hardening into gospel. That is your job. People decide too quickly because certainty is comforting. Robbery gone wrong, random intruder, a disgruntled employee, a political enemy, a jealous admirer. Everyone has a favorite theory, like they are picking a flavor of ice cream. You do not. You stay with what you can touch. A missing child, a ransom note with awkward language, a homemade ladder, a window, a timeline that is already fuzzy. And then the case begins to shift from shock to process. That transition is quiet. It feels like the moment after a car accident when the shouting stops and someone starts calling insurance. The terror remains, but now it has paperwork. Searchers go out into the surrounding land. The area around Highfields is not a city maze. It is rural, wooded, uneven. A person can disappear into it, especially at night, especially if they plan their route. Dogs may be brought, men with flashlights, neighbors with good intentions. Again, congratulations. The ground is being trampled by 100 shoes, each one erasing the story you want to read. But detectives do not get to choose their scenes. They get what the world gives them, and they build a case anyway. You start collecting statements, calmly, repetitively, the same questions over and over, because people's first answers are often their feelings, not facts. What time did you last see him? What did you do next? What did you hear? Did you notice anything unusual earlier in the day? Someone remembers a car. Someone thinks they heard a sound. Someone recalls the dog barking. Someone mentions a handyman. Someone else mentions a stranger seen near the road days ago. Most of it will go nowhere. That is not pessimism. That is experience. The tragedy of a famous case is that it becomes a mirror. Everyone sees their own fears in it, and everyone wants to add a piece to the puzzle, even if their piece is from a different box. While those first hours unfold, the ransom note is the tether. It suggests communication. It suggests the kidnappers want something. That implies the child has value alive, at least in the criminal's logic. And for a little while, everyone clings to that logic, because the alternative is unbearable. In the meantime, the police try to establish lines of authority. New Jersey State Police take a leading role. There are political tensions, jurisdictional questions, and professional egos. Again, boring. And again, deadly important. Because investigations are not just about clues. They are about who controls the flow of information, who decides what gets followed, who gets shut down, who gets listened to. In this case, the Lindbergh name pulls in a new orbit of influence. Lindbergh has relationships, wealthy friends, public attention. He can talk to people the average parent cannot. That is not a criticism. It is an observation, the same way you observe that a storm pushes some boats harder than others. Eventually, the case will involve federal law in a more direct way. But early on, the work is local and physical. It is men walking in the cold, checking brush and ditches, scanning the edge of the property for anything dropped, a blanket, a shoe, a scrap of paper, anything. And now you notice another quiet detail. The ladder is not just present, it is damaged. One of the rails is split, and that split matters. It tells you something about weight and stress. It suggests the ladder was used, and it was used under load. Maybe the person carrying the child came down too fast. Maybe the ladder shifted. Maybe the ground was uneven. The split could be an accident, or it could be a clue to the person's strength and urgency. You begin to map the most likely path from the nursery, through the window, down the ladder, across the yard, into the dark. You imagine the kidnapper moving with a bundle held tight, trying to keep it quiet, trying not to fall. If the child cried, the kidnapper might have panicked. If the child stayed asleep, the kidnapper might have felt confident. Either way, the kidnapper had to get off the property and into transportation, a car most likely. That means a vehicle was waiting somewhere, close enough to carry a child quickly, far enough to avoid being seen from the house. You look toward the road, you think about tire tracks, you think about mud, you think about the way an engine sounds at night and whether anyone would notice. But noticing is not the same as remembering. People hear engines every day. They forget them the way you forget birdsong. As the hours move forward, the initial search continues, but the investigation begins to organize around the things left behind. That is always the pivot. The missing person is the center of the grief, but the evidence is the center of the work, and there is something quietly cruel about that. You focus on wood and paper, while a family focuses on a child. You let the objects become your companions, because people are too raw to handle. You start to understand the note's demand more clearly as it's discussed. It asks for $50,000. In 1932, that is not just money. That is an entire other life. The note includes instructions that suggest more communication will follow. It is not a one-time message. It is the opening of a negotiation. So now you have a kidnapping that behaves like a plan. That does not mean the plan is good. It just means someone made one. You look for the little signs of planning, the homemade ladder, the note written in advance, the symbol used as a mark, the selection of this house, this night, the knowledge that the child was here, in this room, on this schedule. And the more you look at planning, the more you have to look at familiarity. Not necessarily familiarity with the family, but familiarity with the environment, with the property, with the idea of this house as a target, because random criminals do not usually build custom ladders. They improvise, they break windows, they leave chaos behind. This is quiet, and quiet suggests time. The night becomes a long stretch of action and waiting, braided together. Action in the search, waiting for the next note, action in the interviews, waiting for a lead that feels real. And by morning, the case is already bigger than the house. It is a public obsession. It is a national wound. People talk about it at breakfast tables and train stations. They talk like their words will somehow reach the woods and call the child back. Now, as a detective, you are supposed to be hardened. And you are in the way a person gets hardened by too many late nights and too much coffee. But there is a particular heaviness in crimes involving children, not because they are rare, but because they are cleanly unfair. There is no story that makes it make sense, so you do what you always do when the world refuses to make sense. You return to procedure. You return to objects. You return to the small, dependable physics of evidence, because evidence, at least, does not care about fame. And once the shock dulls into a numb routine, you do what detectives always do. You start looking at what's left behind. The note becomes your first real conversation with the kidnapper. Not a face, not a voice, a few lines of ink pressed into paper by a hand that had to pause, lift, and move again. You study it the way you study any message from someone who thinks they are in control. You notice the spelling. You notice that some words are formed strangely, as if the writer is used to a different language structure. You notice the choice of phrases, the way threats are implied without being too specific. That is important because specificity is risky. Specificity gives you something to verify later. The ransom note is both personal and impersonal. It speaks directly to the family, but it reads like a template someone practiced, like a person trying on the costume of a kidnapper. That is what criminals do, more often than anyone wants to admit. They role play. They imitate what they think crime looks like, from newspapers and gossip and old stories. They think the performance will protect them. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the performance is the mistake. The paper itself matters too. Where did it come from? Was it from the house, grabbed in a hurry? Or was it brought in, written elsewhere, carried in a pocket, already folded and ready? Investigators will look at everything about that note, the ink, the handwriting, the pressure of the pen. They will look for indents, faint impressions left on other pages, like the ghost of writing that bled through time. And even if you do not have modern forensic labs in 1932, you still have eyes. You still have patience. You still have men whose entire job is to notice what other people ignore. Then you return to the ladder again, because it is the most physical thing the kidnapper left behind. It is hard to deny. It is hard to explain away. A ladder is not just a ladder. It is a choice. It is a tool someone trusted. It had to support weight. It had to be carried. It had to be placed. Without making too much noise, you examine its construction. 3 sections, built to fit together. That means the kidnapper either had woodworking skill or had access to someone who did. The wood type can be identified. The nails, the fasteners, the method of assembly. These are not glamorous details, but they narrow the world. If you find a man who builds ladders like this, you have found a man who thinks like the person who came to this house. You also consider the split rail again? If the ladder broke under weight, then the kidnapper might have stumbled. A stumble means a moment of noise, a moment of panic, a moment where something could have been dropped. So you search the ground beneath the window carefully. You look for anything that might have fallen from a pocket. A tool? A piece of wood? A scrap? even a cigarette butt. If the kidnapper was the kind of person who smoked while doing something he should not, that sounds absurd. But criminals smoke at crime scenes all the time. They stop being careful the way you stop being careful with your diet at midnight. You tell yourself one small thing will not matter. It does. And then there is the timeline, the most boring and most brutal object of all. Not paper, not wood, just time. The order of events. The minutes between checks on the child. The time the family ate dinner. The time staff moved through the hallway. The time someone thought they heard a sound outside. You do not need a dramatic reconstruction. You need a simple one. A timeline is just a fence you build around reality, so imagination cannot wander too far. Here is what matters. Early, the child was put to bed. The household moved through its evening routines, and at some point, between the last confirmed sighting and the discovery of the absence, the kidnapper entered and left. That window of time is the entire crime. It is the length of a television show, the length of a bath, the length of one restless nap. And inside that window, a person brought a ladder to the house, climbed to a nursery window, took a sleeping child, left a note, and disappeared. When you say it like that, it sounds impossible. But impossibility is often just unfamiliarity. People can do a lot in a short time when they are not stopping to feel guilty. You also start to consider the inside of the house. Could the kidnapper have come through a door instead? Could someone have been let in? Could the note have been placed to misdirect? But the latter is persuasive. It suggests an outside approach. It suggests a person who did not want to be seen inside the home, moving through hallways where anyone could wake up. It is not proof. It is a strong suggestion. And now, because the case is already loud in the public mind, you feel pressure to move fast, not just from newspapers, but from the family, from politicians, from the idea that the world is watching and expects results like a restaurant order. Detective work does not work like that. Clues do not appear because you are on a deadline. People do not confess because you are tired. So you start doing the slow work, cataloging, photographing, writing down details that will feel pointless until they are not. Where the ladder was found, the angle against the house, the distance from the window, the condition of the ground, any marks on the sill, any scuff on the wall, any disturbance in the nursery. You do it because you cannot time travel. You cannot go back to the quiet moment when the kidnapper was alone in that room. So you rebuild it from crumbs, and the note becomes the central crumb. It will be compared to later communications. It will be analyzed for patterns, certain misspellings, certain repeated phrases, the symbol, the spacing between words, the way the writer makes his letters. Handwriting is habit. It is muscle memory. Even when a person tries to disguise it, they keep their favorite shortcuts. They cross a letter a certain way. They lean a word. They press harder on downstrokes. They lift at the same point. A person can fake confidence, but it is hard to fake your hand. The case is still in its earliest stage, where hope is loud and evidence is quiet. But you can already feel the shape of the work ahead. Years of it, maybe. If luck is not kind, you remind yourself of the oldest truth in this job. Big cases are rarely solved by one brilliant moment. They are solved by attention, by repetition, by the willingness to look at the same object again and again until it finally confesses what it is. You let your mind stay calm, and you keep your focus narrow. The note, the ladder, the window, the timeline. Because crumbs only help if you can keep them from blowing away. So the next step is control, and control is hard when the whole world is watching. Control starts with borders, and in a case like this, you do not get many. You are trying to build a fence out of string while a parade keeps walking through it. The house is still full of footsteps, police boots, family shoes, helpful neighbors, important friends of important people. Each one of them absolutely certain they are being careful, each one of them quietly turning the scene into a scrapbook of other people's fingerprints. So you do what you can with what you have. In 1932, you decide what is yours now. The note is yours. The ladder is yours. The window, the sill, the nursery floor, yours. You get names, you get times, you write it all down, because memory will betray everyone later. You separate the curious from the useful. That sounds rude. It is also the only way to work. You send people to other rooms. You keep the nursery as quiet as you can. You put someone on the stairs, not as a guard, but as a human reminder that the world has changed. Outside, you can already feel the pressure building the way weather changes before rain. The Lindbergh name is a radio signal. It pulls in attention, and attention pulls in noise. And the worst part is, the noise sounds like help. The phones begin. Calls from strangers. Calls from men who claim to know something. Calls from people who want a reward before there is even a reward. Calls from the kind of person who hears tragedy and thinks, finally, a stage. You are not allowed to ignore it. In a normal case, you might. In this one, every call is treated like it could be the thread. So you start sorting. And sorting is the most boring form of heroism you will ever do. You take down messages. You listen to voices trying to sound important. You listen to voices trying to sound harmless. You listen to voices that shake, and you learn slowly that shaking does not mean honest. Sometimes shaking is performance. Sometimes it is just a person enjoying the moment. Meanwhile, the newspapers begin to write the story before you have even finished walking the yard. They put words in everyone's mouth. They describe evidence they have not seen. They build theories the way children build forts, with confidence and no engineering. Forget what the news tells you. That is the headline, and you are in the evidence room, trying to keep paper from curling in the damp. You look at the note again, not because you expect it to change, but because you change. The first time you read it like a parent would, with panic. Now you read it like a person who has been lied to professionally. The writing has that forced, careful ugliness. The misspellings do not feel random. Some are the kind a person makes when they hear English more than they write it. Some are the kind a person makes when they are trying to look uneducated. There is a difference, and it is subtle. A person truly struggling with language will stumble in patterns. A person faking it will sprinkle mistakes like salt, too evenly, too deliberately. You notice, too, how the note handles threats. It warns the family not to involve police, the way all ransom notes do. The writer wants to sound in control, but not too specific, not too committal. It is the tone of someone who wants obedience without giving you anything you can test. And then there is that mark, the little symbol meant to identify future messages as real. A crude logo, a brand. Criminals love brands. It makes them feel like professionals when they are usually just amateurs with nerve. Now you try to control something else, information. Because the moment you announce every detail, you give the kidnapper a map. If he is listening, and of course he is listening, he learns what you know and what you do not. So you hold back what you can. You keep certain things quiet, the exact wording, the exact symbol, the exact construction of the ladder, not because you like secrets, but because secrets are bait. Later, someone will say something only the real kidnapper should know. And that is how control works in a case like this. You do not dominate the world. You create small traps and wait. The problem is, you are not the only one making decisions. The family has its own gravity. Charles Lindbergh is not a man used to being told, wait. He is used to being told, yes, sir. He has friends who can open doors. He has a reputation that makes police departments stand a little straighter, and the investigation becomes a crowded room, full of authority that does not quite agree. This is where scene contamination stops being about footprints and becomes about egos. One group wants to handle it quietly. One group wants to keep the family cooperative. One group wants to keep the press fed enough that they do not turn feral. Everyone wants to be the person who solves it, and nobody wants to be the person who ruined it. You start building your list of leads, and it looks like a junk drawer, a strange car seen near the road, a man with a heavy accent asking questions in town, a letter that claims the baby is already out of state. A psychic? Yes, of course a psychic, a self-appointed private investigator who promises results and delivers nothing but invoices. You do not laugh, not out loud. You just file it. Sorting is what you do. You keep, you discard, you set aside, you return later. Your desk becomes a graveyard of paper, and somewhere in that mess, you find a detail that is not dramatic, but it is solid. The ladder is not store-bought. It is made in sections. It is built to travel. Whoever made it thought about transport. You imagine it in the back of a car, not a fancy car, something common, something that can park on a rural road without drawing notice. The ladder is long, but in sections it becomes just another bundle. A package, a load of wood. Now, because control is slipping everywhere else, you cling to what can be controlled, the ransom process. The note promised more communication. That gives you a structure, a schedule maybe, instructions, a place, a method. Kidnappers are not artists. They are negotiators who think fear makes them powerful. They want money, and money requires interaction. Interaction creates mistakes. Mistakes create cases. So you wait for the next contact, and while you wait, you prepare. You start gathering the money because the family will pay if they believe it could bring the child back. $50,000 is not pocket change. It is a pile of paper heavy enough to bend a man's posture. It is also, for detectives, an opportunity, because money can be tagged, not with little glowing trackers, not in 1932, but with serial numbers, with recorded bill sequences, with specific types of bills that can be watched later. It is slow, analog surveillance, the kind that requires patience and filing cabinets. You begin to understand, too, that the ransom note itself is going to bring in a new kind of professional, someone who deals in words, not handcuffs, a go-between In this case, it becomes a man named Dr. John Condon, a retired school principal from the Bronx. You do not get to choose him. He steps into the story the way certain people always do, drawn by attention and convinced they can help. Condon writes to the newspapers, offering himself as an intermediary. He says he will communicate with the kidnappers. He speaks with confidence, the kind that makes the public feel comforted. Lindbergh, desperate and calculating at the same time, agrees to use him. You might already be frowning because you can see the risk. Middlemen complicate everything. Middlemen create new points of failure. Middlemen can be manipulated, or worse, they can be part of it. But you also understand the pressure. The family wants movement. The police want an opening. And if the kidnappers respond to this man, then at least you have a channel. So, you let the channel form, and you watch it like a hawk watching a mouse hole. Letters begin to move, messages, instructions. The kidnappers demand certain actions, and they demand proof of good faith. They want the money prepared. They want it in a specific form. They want to control the terms. And in this slow exchange, you learn the rhythm of Ransom. It is not one event. It is a tedious dance. Dates, meetings, delays, threats, waiting punctuated by brief moments of high-stakes motion. The family and police are forced into the ugliest routine there is, hoping on a schedule. You watch Lindbergh, and you watch Condon, and you watch the investigators around them, trying to play a game where the other side wrote the rules. Police strategy, even then, is simple in principle and hard in execution. Watch quietly, listen carefully. Do not spook the kidnappers. Do not show too many uniforms. Do not create chaos at the moment you need calm. But in a famous case, calm is rare. Every move is rumored. Every delay is criticized. Every decision is second-guessed by people who have never tried to negotiate with a faceless criminal while a nation stares. Condon begins to correspond directly. He receives letters. He answers. He becomes, briefly, a human mailbox full of other people's fear. One of the letters provides proof that the kidnappers have access to the child. A piece of the child's clothing is produced, a small garment that turns hope into something tangible. That is the point of proof. It is a hook. You feel the room change when proof arrives. Everyone breathes differently. The family leans forward into the world again. Police double down on preparation. The press goes into a frenzy that feels like hunger. Congratulations! You have evidence the child was alive at least at some point after the kidnapping. That is good news. It is also leverage for the kidnappers, and they know it. Now the mummy becomes the center of gravity. You prepare it in the way kidnappers often demand, because kidnappers have preferences, like anyone else. They want bills that are negotiable, easy to spend, hard to trace. They ask for certain denominations, and detectives comply, because the point is not to fight them. The point is to follow what happens next. This is where you start recording serial numbers. Not every single bill in the world, obviously. But the ransom money becomes a documented set, like a deck of cards with known faces. Later, if even one of those bills appears somewhere, it will whisper to you. In the meantime, the exchange is arranged. The details vary in the retelling, but the shape is simple. A meeting point at night, with instructions delivered in a way meant to keep the kidnappers hidden. You are there in spirit, even if you are not the man holding the box. You are in the dark, listening to your own breath. You are staring at trees that look like they could hide anything. You are trying to see without being seen. Condon goes to meet a man who will call himself John. That is not a name, it is a placeholder. It is the kind of name a criminal chooses when he does not want to commit to being real. Condon later describes the man as speaking with an accent, sounding foreign, sounding confident. The man gives instructions. He insists the child is being cared for. He insists the child will be returned after the money is delivered. And the money is delivered. It is an odd moment when you think about it. $50,000 passed in darkness between strangers because everyone involved is betting on the same thing, that the other side will follow through. That bet is made every day in ransom cases, and it is often lost. After payment, more instructions come. There is talk of a location where the child will be found, a boat, a place along the coast. You watch the search unfold, the desperate, organized scramble to follow directions that might be true or might be misdirection. The problem with following a kidnapper's instructions is that you are always late. They wrote the message earlier. They moved earlier. They planned for you to be behind. And then the shape of hope changes. Because on May 12, 1932, the child's body is found not where a happy ending lives, but where accidents and concealment live. In the woods, not far from the Lindbergh home, along a road near Mount Rose. You do not need graphic detail. You do not need to linger. The simple fact is heavy enough. The case is no longer about rescue. It is about reckoning. The air around the investigation becomes colder. Not literally, though it can feel that way. Colder in the human sense. The way people speak more quietly, the way the room empties of optimism. Now everything changes, and nothing changes. Everything changes because the goal is different. You stop imagining a living child being brought back. You start proving what happened, how, and who did it. Nothing changes because the work is still the same dull machinery. Reports, evidence logs, autopsy findings, re-interviews, more waiting, but now the waiting has grief sitting in its lap. You drive, you write, you listen to men tell you what they did on a night months ago, and you watch them struggle to remember the exact time they looked at a clock. You watch them insist they remember, and you know they do not. Not because they are lying, because time gets slippery when you are not paying attention. This is where the investigation becomes procedural in the most mundane way. Paperwork, chain of custody, careful handling of the ladder pieces, the note, anything recovered near the body. You keep things separate. You label. You store. You do not trust your future self to remember. The child's death points you back to that ladder, because the ladder was always a gamble. If the child was carried down a ladder that broke, if there was a fall, if there was panic, then this might not have been a clean plan. It might have been a plan that went wrong. And criminals hate admitting things went wrong. They rewrite their stories the way you rewrite a text message after you have already hit send. They adjust. They lie. They insist on control after control has slipped away. You begin looking at the ladder with new eyes, not just as a tool, but as a possible explanation. If a rung broke, if the rails split under weight, then the kidnapping itself may have caused injury. That is not a comforting thought, but it is a practical one. You also revisit the window, the approach, the ground beneath. You think about the route to a car. You think about how a person might hurry away with a child that is no longer quiet, or worse, a child that is too quiet, and you return again and again to patterns, because once emotion settles into something heavy and steady, patterns are the only comfort detectives get. Patterns are the closest thing this job has to religion. The ransom notes continue, the letters that came during the negotiation. You line them up. You look at handwriting. You look at phrasing. You look at the way the writer uses certain words, the way he spaces certain letters. Handwriting analysis in this era is not a computer output. It is human eyes and experienced skepticism. A document examiner studies slant, pressure, letter formation. He looks at how someone makes an uppercase letter, how they connect strokes, where they pause. Think of it like recognizing someone's texting style, the way they overuse certain punctuation, the way they spell certain words wrong the same way every time, the way they cannot help putting a space before a comma. Habits are fingerprints that do not wash off. You start noticing repeated errors in the notes, certain misspellings, consistent, certain grammar choices, consistent, the way the writer uses the word kid, the way he threatens. It suggests someone whose first language is not English, or someone who wants to look that way. Then there is the ladder again. The ladder is a piece of carpentry, and carpentry is a trade. Trades have supply chains. Lumber comes from places. Nails come from places. Wood is cut by certain tools that leave certain marks. You begin checking saw marks, planing marks. The ladder's wood is examined for where it might have been purchased. That sounds impossible. But wood is not as anonymous as it looks when you are trying hard enough. Some of the wood used matches a type of lumber sold in certain yards. The construction suggests a person comfortable with tools. The nails and fasteners suggest access to materials, not just improvisation. And because this case has money behind it and attention behind it, those small leads are pursued longer than they might be in an ordinary case. Men spend hours in lumber yards asking boring questions. They talk to carpenters. They talk to contractors. They ask, did anyone order something like this? Did anyone buy this kind of wood? Most of them shrug. Some of them remember. But memory, again, is soft. Now you face the other truth of a case like this. There are too many suspects. Because the world is large and the crime is simple enough to fit in many hands. People look at employees. People look at household staff. People look at nearby residents. People look at anyone with a grudge, anyone with debt, anyone with a foreign accent, anyone who seems out of place. In the 1930s, the word foreign alone is enough to ruin a man's life. Accents become evidence in the public imagination. Poverty becomes suspicious. Being the wrong kind of person becomes a crime. If you are doing the job correctly, try not to let that happen. You keep your focus on what connects to the evidence, not what flatters prejudice. But the pressure is constant, and the public wants a villain. The public wants a face. The public wants the story to feel tidy again. So the investigation becomes a long, slow attempt to stay honest. You work the letters, you work the ladder, you work the timeline. You track down every claim, every supposed sighting, every report of a crying child, every rumor about a baby on a train. Most of it dissolves under scrutiny, not because people are evil, because people want to believe they are part of the story. They want their ordinary lives to touch significance. And the case keeps moving forward on boring rails. Evidence is gathered. evidence is stored, evidence is re-examined, reports are written, rewritten, clarified. You begin to see that the only way through is persistence. Then, slowly, something begins to tighten. Patterns in the ransom notes suggest a consistent hand. The latter suggests a consistent maker, and the ransom money, now out in the world, becomes its own kind of witness. Because money does not stay hidden forever. Money wants to be spent. Even criminals have to buy groceries. Even criminals have rent. Even criminals want small pleasures that make them feel normal again. And that is where you set your quiet trap. The ransom was paid using gold certificates, among other bills. In that era, gold certificates are real currency, paper notes backed by gold, held by the government. They are also the kind of bills that can be watched because they are notable, less common, easier to flag. Banks are told to watch for them. Businesses are told to watch for them. Serial numbers are recorded and lists are distributed. This is tedious work. It is clerks and tellers and shop owners scanning bills in the middle of their normal day. It is the opposite of a dramatic stakeout. It is paperwork as surveillance, and time passes, months, then years. That is the part people forget. They imagine the kidnapping, the ransom, the tragedy, and then they imagine an arrest. But real cases often have a long, quiet middle where nothing seems to happen. Nothing happens loudly. Quietly, the lists circulate. Quietly, people keep their eyes open. Quietly, the ransom money begins to drift through the economy like a slow leak. Then, in September of 1934, more than 2 years after the kidnapping, a gold certificate shows up at a gas station in New York City. It is spent like any other bill. It buys an ordinary thing, the kind of thing criminals always buy when they think they are safe, a small convenience. But the attendant at the station notices something. Maybe he has been told to watch for these bills. Maybe the bill looks familiar, the way you recognize a song you have not heard in years. He becomes suspicious enough to do a simple, brilliant thing. He writes down the license plate number of the car that handed him the bill. That is it. That is the moment. Not a gunfight, not a confession, not a chase through alleyways. A man with a pen writing a number on a scrap. Congratulations, you have just watched the case turn on the smallest hinge. That plate leads investigators to a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German immigrant living in the Bronx, a carpenter, a man with tools, a man with a life that looks ordinary enough to pass without comment until money whispers his name. Now the work becomes what it always becomes. When you finally have a person, not just a theory, slow examination. You do not get to leap to certainty. You do not get to declare victory because the public wants you to. You get to build a case that can survive daylight. You begin with the simple steps. You locate Hauptmann. You watch him. You check his routine. You see where he goes, who he sees, what he does with his hands. Then you bring him in. The arrest happens, and the story turns, in the public mind, into a kind of relief. People love an arrest. An arrest feels like order returning. But you know better. An arrest is only the beginning of a new kind of work. Proving. Investigators search Hauptmann's home. They look for money. They look for evidence that connects him to the letters, to the ladder, to the ransom exchange. And they find, among other things, large amounts of the ransom money hidden away. Gold certificates, bills with recorded serial numbers, money that should not be in his possession unless he has a story that can hold its shape. He has a story, of course. Everyone does. He claims the money belongs to a friend, a man named Isidore Fish, who has supposedly given him the money and then died. A convenient friend, a dead friend, the kind of friend criminals love because dead men do not argue. You listen to this story the way you listen to all stories from suspects, not with outrage, but with quiet attention. Does it fit the facts? Does it explain the money? Does it explain the ladder? Does it explain the gas station bill? A story is not judged by how confident it sounds. It is judged by whether it survives contact with reality. Now you start comparing. Handwriting samples are taken. Hauptmann is asked to write certain phrases, certain words, similar to the ransom notes. Experts compare slant, letter formation, spacing. They look at the way he makes certain shapes, the way his hand moves. This is not perfect science even now, and it was less standardized then, but it is still something, a structured observation of habit. Then you go back to the ladder, and the ladder becomes more than a prop. It becomes a bridge. Wood in Hauptmann's home is examined. Tools are examined. Lumber is examined. The idea is simple. Can you connect the ladder's construction to his materials, his methods? Investigators determine that one of the ladder rails appears to match wood missing from Hauptmann's attic. The grain patterns, the nail holes, the fit, suggesting that a piece of wood was cut from his home and used in the ladder. That is the kind of evidence that does not care about accents or reputation. Wood does not have an opinion. It either matches or it does not. You also look at the ransom notes again, at the phrasing, at the spelling. Certain oddities align with Hauptmann's known writing habits. Again, not perfect, but cumulative. That is how this case works. Accumulation. Snow gathering on a branch. Hauptmann is questioned. He denies. He offers explanations. He shifts. He insists he is innocent, and he insists the evidence is misunderstanding. You have heard it all before. Innocent men insist too. Guilty men insist too. The difference is not volume. The difference is whether their explanations can be verified. You check his employment records, his whereabouts, his finances. You compare what he earned with what he suddenly possessed. You look at when he started spending more freely, when he deposited money, when he lived beyond his means. Money leaves a trail even when it tries to be quiet. And all of this happens under a bright, unforgiving spotlight. Reporters swarm. Headlines scream. The public picks sides. In a case like this, people do not just want justice. They want certainty. They want the world to make sense again, and they want one man to carry the weight of it. You keep working anyway because your job is not to satisfy hunger. Your job is to feed a court. The evidence is assembled. The money, the wood, the handwriting, witness identifications, including Condon's claims about the voice and accent of the man he met. Each piece alone is arguable. Together, they begin to feel like a net. But nets have holes, and defense attorneys live in holes. So, you keep tightening. You keep checking. You keep finding small corroborations, small alignments. You take the boring parts seriously, because boring is where cases survive. By the time the case reaches trial, it is no longer just an investigation. It is a public ritual. A courtroom becomes a theater with rules. People speak carefully. Objects are presented like relics. The ladder, the notes, the bills. The trial of Bruno Hauptmann in 1935 becomes the trial of the century. That phrase is used too often, but here it fits, at least in the way the public consumes it. You sit with the strange calm of it. In court, everything is slower than people expect. Schedules, objections, testimony that crawls through details like a tired animal. Witnesses speak, experts speak, Condon speaks. The latter is discussed in a way that would make a carpenter nod and a novelist yawn. And you remember, in that courtroom quiet, that this is what justice looks like most of the time. Not a dramatic moment, but a long attempt to be fair using imperfect tools. The prosecution argues the accumulation. The defense argues the doubt. The jury listens, and the world outside argues with itself. Hauptmann is convicted and eventually executed in April of 1936. That is the official end of the case in the way paperwork likes endings. But endings in famous crimes are never clean. Doubts persist. Arguments continue for decades. People question evidence, question procedures, question the fairness of the process, question whether the public pressure distorted the outcome. You, being tired and practical, hold two truths at once. One, there was real evidence tying Hauptmann to the ransom money and to the ladder's wood. That is not nothing. Two, the investigation and trial happened in a storm of attention, and storms bend trees. They bend people. They bend institutions. So the Lindbergh case becomes, for detectives, a lesson file. Not just a tragedy, but a manual written in grief. A manual that says, control your scene early, because the world will trample it. A manual that says, document everything, because memory will fail you. A manual that says, money talks, but only if you are patient enough to listen for years. And once you file that heavy chapter away, you carry its habits into the next cases, the smaller ones that never become national myths, but still end with someone's life cracked open. Because, speaking of patterns, once you have watched a crime like this unfold, you start seeing the same mistakes everywhere, just wearing cheaper clothes. You move forward in time and space, drifting into a few quieter files, the kind that never get a statue or a movie, but still teach you what people do when they think nobody is watching. In one case, the scene is too neat. You walk into a modest house, not a mansion on a hill, just a place with worn carpet and family photos that have faded a little at the edges. The air smells faintly like cleaning product, the kind that promises lemon and delivers chemicals. A body is found, and the first thing you notice is what is missing. Disorder, you expect, in a sudden violent event. Chaos, a knocked-over chair, a spilled drink, a broken lamp, something honest. Instead, everything looks staged for a landlord inspection. Furniture, aligned, surfaces wiped, even the trash can looks recently emptied. You think, for a moment, maybe it really was tidy people living a tidy life. But then you see the small detail that ruins the performance. Dust. Not everywhere, just in one narrow strip behind a picture frame that was recently moved. Cleaners clean what they can see. Stagers forget what they cannot. You lift the frame. The wall behind it is a different shade, and the dust line is a quiet timeline. The frame was moved after the cleaning, after the event, after someone decided to make things look calm. Congratulations, the killer cleaned the scene, and in doing so, admitted there was something to clean. You find tiny fibers stuck to a damp patch on the baseboard, the kind a person leaves when they wipe in a hurry. You find a faint smear where a wet cloth dragged something darker than lemon scent across paint. You do not need drama. You need a lab, a microscope, and a patient technician who knows how to treat dust like a witness. The suspect, in that case, turns out to be a person close enough to know routines, close enough to have keys, close enough to believe they could control the story. They did not count on dust being more loyal than people. In another case, the lie collapses because time is stubborn. A man reports his wife missing. He tells you he last saw her in the morning, that she went for errands and never returned. He says it with the right sadness, the kind people practice in mirrors without meaning to. You listen, you nod, you write, you ask him about his day. He gives you a neat timeline. Too neat. Every hour accounted for, every movement explained, like he is reading from a receipt. But real days do not read like receipts. They smear. They have gaps. They have forgotten moments. You start checking the ordinary anchors of modern life. The things people forget are recording them. Not satellites and glamorous hacking, just the boring systems that run the world. A toll booth ticket, a gas station purchase, a phone call logged by a carrier, a store clerk who remembers a face because it came in right before closing. The man's story says he was home at 6. The toll record says his car crossed a bridge at 6:27. His story says he never left the neighborhood. The gas station receipt says he filled up 10 miles away. The times do not match, and time is not emotional. Time is arithmetic. You bring him back in calmly. You ask him to explain the difference. He tries. He adjusts his story the way people adjust a blanket that is too short, trying to cover feet and shoulders at the same time. He cannot, because the world is full of clocks now, and clocks are the quiet enemies of sloppy lies. In another file, the case turns on repetition. A string of small thefts, nothing glamorous. Tools missing from garages, packages disappearing from porches, the kind of crime people complain about more than they fear. Then, one day, something escalates. A homeowner confronts the thief, and the confrontation ends badly. Now you have a violent crime attached to a pattern of petty ones, and petty criminals are creatures of habit. They take the same routes, they strike the same neighborhoods, they shop at the same places, because even criminals like convenience. You look at the previous reports, you map them, not with fancy software, just with pens and paper, and the kind of patience that makes you unpopular at parties. You see the shape, a corridor, a cluster. The crimes happen near certain roads, certain escape paths. The thief favors houses with certain layouts, certain fences, certain blind spots. Then you do the boring thing. You wait where the pattern leads. Not every night, not with sirens, just quiet surveillance, the kind that tastes like cold coffee and stale air in a car. Eventually, a person appears, moving the same way as before, wearing the same kind of clothes, carrying the same kind of bag. Habit is a leash, and most people never realize how tight it is. You catch him not because you are brilliant, but because he is consistent. And that is the echo the Lindbergh case leaves behind in your work. Long after the headlines fade, people do not get caught because evil is dramatic. People get caught because they cannot stop being themselves. Now, back in that era again, because the Lindbergh case also taught something else. Evidence has a life of its own. It waits. It survives years in a drawer. It resurfaces when someone gets careless. The marked money was the best example. A tagged fish released into a river, waiting to be seen again. In ordinary cases, you do the same thing with smaller objects. A stolen watch pawned months later. A gun sold to a cousin. A ring worn by someone who cannot resist showing off. Criminals think time erases their fingerprints. Sometimes it does, but sometimes time simply gives them more opportunities to make mistakes. You learn to be patient with that. Patience is not passive. It is active waiting, like holding a cup under a dripping faucet, knowing the drop will come eventually. And while you wait, you keep returning to the same questions, because the questions are the only stable furniture in a room full of noise. Was this planned, or was it panic? Was this stranger, or familiar? Was this confidence, or luck? Was this the act of one person, or several, each adding their own clumsy contribution? In the Lindbergh case, those questions never fully stop being asked, even after a conviction. People argue about accomplices, about alternate suspects, about whether Hauptmann acted alone, about whether someone else wrote some of the notes, about whether the latter could implicate more than one set of hands. And you, again, carry both truths. Sometimes a crime is a team effort. Sometimes it is one person who talks too much to the wrong friend. Sometimes it is one person with a secret and a circle of people who sense it and say nothing. Silence is an accessory after the fact. But in any case, the methods remain the same. You study objects, you study words, you study money, you study routine, because routine is where they slip. And as you keep drifting through these quieter cases, you notice how often people try to stage reality, like they can rearrange furniture and rearrange truth. They wipe down doorknobs and forget the underside. They throw away a weapon and keep the receipt for buying it. They claim they never left home and their shoes bring in mud from a riverbank. They think investigators are looking for genius. Investigators are looking for inconsistency. A staged scene always has one corner that does not match the rest. One moment where the story changes texture. One spot where the liar forgot what a normal day feels like. That is the comfort, if you can call it that, in boring crime. It is predictable, not the suffering, never the suffering. The mistakes. People cannot help leaving themselves behind. And you keep those thoughts filed neatly because there are still more cases to walk through. More ordinary rooms with something wrong in the quiet and more patient details waiting to be noticed. So you take the next file from the cabinet and it is not famous, which means it is cleaner in one way and worse in another. No crowds, no microphones, no one offering theories like they are handing out flyers. Just you, a thin stack of reports, and a small town that wants to believe it is too quiet for anything serious. The call comes in as something ordinary, dressed up as concern. A neighbor hasn't seen her. The curtains are wrong. The mailbox is full. The kind of details that sound like gossip until they turn into a key. You arrive at a house that smells like stale heat and old cooking oil. The porch boards complain under your shoes. Soft little groans, like the building is tired of holding secrets. The living room is dim. The furniture is modest. Nothing here screams money or drama or motive, which is exactly why everyone will try to force one onto it. You think you are walking into a burglary because that is the story people like. A stranger, a smash and grab, bad luck, clean moral distance. Wrong. Burglars do not take the time to put a chair back where it belongs. And you notice that? Immediately, the chair is straight. The throw blanket is folded like someone respected it. The coffee table has no rings, no clutter, no half-lived life. It is a scene that wants you to admire its manners. Congratulations, you are looking at a room that has been explained in advance. You drift deeper, slow and quiet, because you have learned that the loudest thing in a house is often your own certainty. In the hallway, a family photo leans a fraction to the left. Not much, not enough for a normal person to care, but it is off by the amount a hurried hand would leave behind after wiping. You crouch near the baseboard and you let your eyes do the boring work. Dust lives low. Dust keeps receipts. A cloth can erase a fingerprint, sure, but it can also smear a story into a shape that screams, "Someone tried." Under the edge of a door frame, there is a feigned streak, darker than the paint. Not blood, not cinematic, something transferred by pressure, dirt, grease, the kind of residue you get when a person drags a shoe without lifting it fully. A heel that skims just once and leaves a line like an underline. You look at it and you think of all the times you have walked into a room and tried to act normal. You remember how hard it is to imitate calm when your heart is sprinting. This is the first quiet lesson of the smaller crimes. Staging is not artistry. Staging is panic with a rag. The victim in this file is a woman who lived alone and kept a regular schedule, regular enough that the grocery clerk could tell you her favorite brand, regular enough that the mailman noticed when her porch light didn't click on at dusk. Routine is a lighthouse, and when it goes dark, someone always sees it, eventually. The initial report says there are no signs of forced entry. That line shows up in cases like this the way dust shows up on shelves, predictable and often misunderstood. No forced entry does not mean no entry. It means the door did not have to be fought. So you ask the boring questions first. Who had a key? Who had reason? Who had the kind of access that doesn't leave splinters? Neighbors talk in soft voices, like the house might hear them. A friend mentions a handyman. Another mentions a boyfriend who used to stop by. That phrase, used to, is a small graveyard. People say it like the past is finished and safe. But detectives don't believe in safe pasts. The past is where most suspects live. You find the next detail in the kitchen, because kitchens always tell the truth. Bathrooms hide. Bedrooms whisper. Kitchens confess. There is a dish towel hanging too neatly, and beside the sink a sponge sits dry, like it hasn't done work in days. Then you open the trash bin, and the smell is wrong. Not rotten, not traumatic, just fresh. Fresh trash in a house where someone hasn't been seen in a while means someone has been here. Not long enough to live, just long enough to tidy. And tidying after a person disappears is never a good hobby. You bag the towel, you bag the sponge, you take photos of the bin, the liner, the way the knot is tied. Knots are habits. People tie them the same way they sign their name. They don't mean to, they just do. Later, you will learn that the handyman ties his trash bags with a quick double twist, always to the left, a silly detail. The kind of detail you would hate yourself for noticing until it becomes the only detail that doesn't lie. For now, you do the slow work. You make a list of everyone who had access, and you watch how quickly the list becomes personal. People don't like lists that include them. They start offering information unasked. They start polishing their own stories before you even accuse them of anything. You speak to the handyman, and he tells you he hasn't been there in weeks. He says it with the casual confidence of a man who believes being ordinary is an alibi. He tells you he was working across town. He tells you he can prove it. Perfect is a lie wearing a cheap suit. You ask him what he did that day, and he gives you a timeline like a printed brochure. Started at 8, lunch at noon, finished at 5, home by 6. No hesitation, no small confusion, no normal human gaps. Congratulations, you found a man who rehearses. Now you do what you always do. You check the parts of his story that exist outside his mouth. A hardware store receipt, a time card, a call log, a camera at a gas station, grainy and indifferent, watching customers like they are weather. And you don't need a confession. You need one mismatch. You find it in the cheapest place, a few dollars charged at a convenience store at a time he claimed he was across town. It isn't proof of murder. It's proof of motion. It says he was not where he said he was. Then you return to the house again because you are building a rhythm now. Scene, statement, verification, back to scene, back to statement. The cycle is boring on purpose. Boring keeps you honest. In a back room, you notice the carpet fibers near the doorway are bent the wrong way. Most people don't notice fiber direction. You do because you've spent too many nights staring at floors like they are maps. The fibers show that something heavy was dragged from the room toward the hall. Then the path was brushed back, like someone tried to comb the carpet into innocence. But carpet has memory. It forgets slowly. You follow the faint disturbance to a closet, and you smell that sharp chemical scent again. Cleaning products. Somebody wanted the house to feel fresh. Somebody wanted it to feel like nothing bad happened here. That is always the instinct. It never works. The case doesn't end with a dramatic reveal. It ends with accumulation. A smear, a receipt, a knot, a pattern in the way a man lies too smoothly, a quiet confrontation with facts that don't raise their voice. And when the arrest comes, it is almost disappointing. The man is not a monster in appearance. He looks like someone you would pass in a parking lot. That is the second lesson of boring crime. Evil rarely dresses up. It wears whatever was clean that morning. Now the file closes, and you think about the Lindbergh case again, and the way a ladder became a sentence, and you realize the ladder and the dish towel are cousins. Different crimes, same principle. People bring their hands into the story, and their hands leave habits behind. So, you take another case, one where the seam is not too neat, but too loud. This one begins in a parking lot behind a strip of late-night shops. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, and the pavement holds little pools of old rain. It smells like hot brakes and spilled soda, the perfume of places where people don't linger unless they have to. A man calls it in as an accident. Says he found his friend like this. Says there was a fight, but he didn't see who. Says it all happened fast. Fast is a favorite word. Fast is a blanket people throw over details, hoping you won't lift it. You kneel near the edge of the scene and you watch the way his shoes are placed. Not his footprints, not yet. His stance. He stands too far from the body for a friend. He stands like a man near a stranger's problem. His hands keep moving, restless, touching his pockets, rubbing his palms. You ask him what he did after he found the victim. He says he called for help right away. He says he didn't touch anything. He says he kept people away. Then you look at the victim's jacket and you see the fabric bunched at the collar, like someone grabbed it and pulled. If nobody touched anything, the collar would lie flatter. If he didn't move the body, the jacket wouldn't be twisted like that. Small contradictions are where the truth takes its first breath. You check his phone, not with flashy hacking, just with a slow permission of procedure. Calls, times, a missed call at 11:12, a call to emergency services at 11:39. That gap is the entire case. Sometimes 27 minutes of unclaimed time. 27 minutes where a man is deciding what story he wants to live with. You ask him what he did during those minutes, and he shrugs too quickly. He says he panicked. He says he ran around looking for help. He says his phone died for a bit. Phones don't die and resurrect on schedule. They just record. You pull nearby camera footage, and the lot tells you what the mouth won't. The man is there the whole time, walking in small circles, bending down, standing up, returning to the victim, leaving the frame for a minute, then coming back. He is staging, adjusting, arguing with the shape of what happened. Congratulations, you have a liar trying to edit time. This case doesn't need complicated forensics. It needs simple stubbornness. You track his movements through the camera angles like you are watching a slow, boring dance rehearsal. You see him lift something shiny from the ground, hold it close, then slip it into his pocket. Later, you find what it was, a set of keys. Not valuable in themselves, valuable because they belong to the victim, and because the victim's car is now missing. The story shifts, not in a big dramatic confession, in a slow collapse, a lie that starts to sag under its own weight. You confront him with the footage, and he tries to explain it, but explanations are hard when the camera doesn't blink. He wanted the car, or he wanted what was in it, or he wanted to disappear into motion. Motive is often less poetic than people hope. Sometimes it's just greed, wearing a thin mask of panic. Now, you let that case sit too, and you notice how similar it is to the ransom money trail from Lindbergh. People think objects will be silent. Cars, bills, keys, ladders. But objects travel. Objects reappear. Objects keep talking when people stop. So you turn to a third file. Softer, quieter, and cruel in a different way. This one is about a lie that collapses because of routine. Not because of a camera, but because of a receipt you almost throw away. A missing person report. A husband, worried, but not too worried. He says she went for a walk. He says she liked walking at night. He says she must have met someone, maybe left on her own. He says all the words that make you picture a person drifting away like fog. But you speak to her friends, and they tell you she hated walking at night. She hated the cold. She carried pepper spray in her purse, because she hated feeling exposed. Routine again. Her routine is not his story. You check her phone records. There are no outgoing calls after 8:15. No texts. No little signs of life. You check her bank card. No purchases. No small comforts bought at gas stations or drugstores. People don't disappear neatly unless someone helps them. Then you find the receipt. A grocery store receipt in their kitchen trash. It's dated the day after she supposedly vanished. The items are ordinary: milk, bread, coffee. But the receipt has a loyalty number attached. Her loyalty number. So either she was alive and shopping, which contradicts his timeline, or someone used her identity to create normal. Creating normal is staging in a different outfit. You pull the store's security footage. It shows him, not her, at the register, using her loyalty account, buying her brand of coffee like a man trying to keep the house smelling like her. It's almost tender in a twisted way. A person trying to maintain the illusion of everyday life because he can't face what he did to destroy it. You bring him in again, and you don't raise your voice. You don't need to. You show him the receipt. You show him the footage. You let silence do what shouting never does. You let it make him hear himself. His story changes, then changes again. He says she asked him to shop. He says she was sick. He says she was sleeping. He says she left after. Stories that keep moving are trying to outrun something. You keep asking the same questions in the same calm tone until the contradictions stack high enough that even he can see them. That is how these cases often end. Not with brilliant deduction, with a person exhausting their own supply of lies. And while that unfolds, you think about how boring modern evidence can be. Receipts, loyalty numbers, timestamps, the annoying little systems of daily life that people forget exist until they become the most reliable witness in the room. It's almost comforting if you ignore what it's attached to. The world is full of quiet record keepers. You turn the page to another case because the hallway of human mistakes is long and every door looks the same from far away. This next one involves a pattern of small thefts, the kind you can barely get people to file reports about. A rake missing from a shed, a bicycle taken from a yard, a package gone from a porch. The crimes of annoyance. Then it escalates. It always can. Not because escalation is fate, but because a person who gets away with small things starts believing in bigger ones. They treat consequences like a rumor. You sit with the previous reports and you map them the way detectives have mapped them for 100 years. Pen, paper, dots on a grid. You notice the thefts cluster around a certain set of streets, and you notice something else? They happen on trash collection days. That sounds meaningless until you think like a bored thief. Trash day means people are distracted. People leave garages open. People move in and out, carrying bags, not paying attention to shadows. Trash day also means there are more vehicles on the street, more noise, more cover. A thief can blend into it like a bad smell in a kitchen. You set up your watch, not with drama, just with patience. You sit in an unmarked car that smells like old upholstery and colder coffee. You wait through the hours when nothing happens, because waiting is the real job. Then you see him, not a mastermind, just a man walking with a little too much purpose, wearing a hoodie like it's a disguise. He checks a porch, moves on, checks another, moves on. He is repeating a route, a comfortable loop, like a person taking their daily walk, habit again. The leash, when you stop him, he acts offended. Offense is a common defense. He says he lives nearby. He says he's just walking. He says you're harassing him. Then you find the small things in his bag. A package addressed to someone else, a set of pliers, a flashlight. Nothing dramatic, just tools and opportunity. In his pocket, you find a distinctive coin, the kind given out at a local arcade. It belonged to a homeowner who filed a report last week. A stupid little token, valuable only because it traveled into the wrong pocket. This is how boring cases teach you. It is never one giant clue. It is 10 small ones that agree. Now, you let that sit too. And you feel the way all these cases echo the larger one. The Lindbergh file sitting heavy in the back of your mind, like a book you can never fully close. Because in Lindbergh, it was a ladder and a ransom note, and money that couldn't stop circulating. In these smaller cases, it's dust and receipts and camera footage and trash day. Different decades, same human habits. And you start thinking about one of the most common habits of all, the habit of trying to be too normal. That's a category all by itself. People commit something awful, then spend the next day mowing the lawn. They go to work. They bring donuts. They chat about the weather. Not because they are calm, because they think normal behavior is camouflage. But normal behavior after abnormal events often has a wrong texture to it. Like a sweater that looks fine until you touch it and realize it's cheap and itchy. So you open another case, and this one is a house fire. Everyone loves a house fire explanation. Fire destroys evidence. Fire turns a messy scene into ash and sympathy. The report says electrical fault, old wiring, tragic accident. You arrive after the flames are out. The air still tastes burnt, and the floor squishes in places from water. Everything is damp and gray. Fire scenes are quiet in a special way, the kind of quiet that comes when a building has had its voice taken. You move through it, slowly. You look at the patterns of burn. Fire has behavior. It climbs. It spreads. It favors certain materials. It leaves V-shaped marks that point back toward origin, like arrows drawn in soot. You find the origin point, and it's wrong. Not impossible, just wrong. The heaviest burn is low, near the floor, where the wiring explanation says it shouldn't be. Then you smell it. Accelerant, a faint chemical sting under the smoke. Not the sweet rot of old wood burning, but that sharp artificial bite. You collect samples. That's the boring part. Little bits of debris in clean containers, labels, times, chain of custody. All the unromantic steps that keep a defense attorney from calling you sloppy. The lab later confirms what your nose suspected. A flammable liquid. Not an accident. Not old wiring. Someone helped the fire start. And the homeowner, he is too composed. He stands on the wet grass, talking to neighbors, nodding like a man listening to condolences he doesn't deserve. He tells you he was out late. He came home and saw smoke. He tried to get in, but it was too hot. Then you notice his shoes. They are clean. Not wet, not sooty. If he tried to get in, he would have stepped in water, ash, something. Clean shoes on a fire night are like a smile at a funeral. Congratulations. You have found a man who didn't go where he said he went. You check his insurance policy, recently increased. You check his finances, recently strained. You check his phone location data, because modern life tattles, and his phone was not out late. It was parked near the house. then moved away, then came back after the fire started. He thought fire would erase his problems. Instead, it preserved them in a different form, a timeline that doesn't care about his tone. That case, too, ends quietly, with paperwork and court dates and a plea deal that nobody celebrates. The house is still gone. The neighbors still have to look at the empty lot. Justice, even when it arrives, doesn't rebuild walls. You keep going, because the outline of the night demands a few more echoes. Different faces, similar mistakes. Here's one that is almost gentle, until you realize what it means. A robbery at a small business. The owner says a masked man came in near closing, demanded cash, fled. Simple. But the owner's story has a flaw. He describes the robber's weapon in detail, but he can't describe the robber's height accurately. People remember what scares them, yes, but they also remember scale. The way someone fills a doorway, the way their shoulders sit. You walk behind the counter and you see the cash drawer. It's open, but there are no scratch marks, no frantic rummaging. Bills are missing, but the coins are untouched. A real robber in a hurry often scoops everything. A staged robber takes what looks clean. Then you look at the security camera. The angle is suspiciously wrong, aimed at the ceiling for most of the event. Convenient. Too convenient. You check the camera system logs, and you find the recording was manually turned off, then turned back on. Not a malfunction, a choice. The owner insists he doesn't know how to do that. He insists he's not technical. But the technician from the camera company says the owner asked 2 weeks ago how to adjust the settings. He wanted to improve the picture. Congratulations. He improved it right into darkness. The motive is boring too. Debt, gambling, a business bleeding money, a man trying to buy time by faking victimhood. He thought a staged robbery would buy sympathy, maybe insurance coverage, maybe a clean explanation for missing cash. What it bought was a fraud charge. Because lies don't just fail, they multiply your trouble. You set that file down, and you notice the theme tightening like a slow knot. In every one of these cases, the criminal believed in one of two myths. Either nobody will notice, or if they notice, they can't prove it. Both myths are comforting, and both myths are wrong more often than people think. Not because detectives are geniuses, but because the world is made of records and habits and little physical realities that don't cooperate with fantasies. The Lindbergh case, in its famous way, taught those lessons at a national scale. Marked money, documented serial numbers, a gas station attendant with a pen. The slow hum of bureaucracy doing its job long after the headlines moved on. In the smaller cases, it's the same hum. A clerk scanning a receipt, a fire investigator sniffing smoke, a camera log quietly recording a human decision, and you're always in the same posture. Not heroic, not glamorous, slightly hunched, usually tired, listening to people explain themselves while you listen harder to the things they didn't mean to say. That's the part nobody sells in movies. The long middle. The checking and rechecking. The second interview, where you ask the same question, just 1 degree to the left, because you want to see if the answer stays the same shape. Because truth stays the same shape, lies have to be carried, and people get tired. So you drift into another sketch, and this one is about identification. Not the shaky kind where someone points across a courtroom dramatically, but the boring kind where a person gets caught because they can't stop buying the same thing. A series of counterfeit bills shows up in a region. Not big Hollywood counterfeiting, just crude paper passed at small stores, often late in the day when clerks are exhausted and lighting is bad. You track where the bills appear. It's a wandering line, like someone drawing a route through town with their errands. Then you notice a pattern. Inside the pattern, the bills are almost always used to buy one item: lottery tickets, not groceries, not gas. Lottery tickets, small, quick, exchangeable. A person turning fake money into real chance. It's almost poetic if you like poetry that smells like desperation. You talk to store clerks, most can't remember faces. But one clerk remembers a man who always buys the same brand of cigarettes with his lottery tickets. Always. And he always scratches them at the counter, right there, like he can't wait. You pull the store camera. The man has a distinctive way of holding his lighter, thumb curled oddly. An old injury, maybe. He comes in at similar times, wearing a work jacket with a logo half hidden by dirt. Now you go to the boring places again, the local businesses that use that logo. You ask who has that jacket. You ask who has that injury. You ask who has been complaining about money recently. And you find him, not because he's clever, but because he's consistent. He wants his cigarettes. He wants his tickets. He wants the routine that makes him feel like he's still a regular person. When you search his car, you find the printer paper, the ink, the crude cutting tools. Not a mastermind setup. A small, sad workshop of shortcuts. He tells you he only did it a few times. They all say that. He tells you he never meant harm, as if harm only counts when it's loud. But harm can be quiet. It can be the cashier who gets blamed for taking a fake bill. It can be the small shop that eats the loss. It can be the way trust erodes in places that can't afford erosion. You file it and you move on, because the night is long and the hallway echoes keep coming. Another case, another familiar mistake, the mistake of thinking a digital footprint is invisible because you can't see it. A young man reports his car stolen, says he parked it outside his apartment, came down in the morning, and it was gone. He wants an insurance payout. He wants a clean break from a vehicle he can't afford anymore. He is polite, calm, cooperative, too cooperative. You ask him where his keys are. He has them. You ask if he has a spare. He says no. You ask if he has any idea who might take it. He says no, but he offers theories anyway. Then you check the building's entry logs. His key fob left the building at 2:13 in the morning, returned at 2:48, the same night his car supposedly vanished. He says he was asleep. Congratulations, his own door has contradicted him. You check nearby cameras, and you see his car roll out calmly. No broken glass, no frantic theft. It looks like a person driving their own car, because it is. You confront him with that, and he pivots. Says he must have sleepwalked. Says someone stole his key fob. Says the system must be wrong. The system is boring, and that's why it's strong. It has no motive. It just logs. Eventually, the truth comes out in the most unromantic way. He arranged for a friend to move the car and hide it so he could report it stolen. His friend used a toll road because criminals love convenience and toll systems love recording license plates. Timestamps again, receipts again, ordinary infrastructure doing the work of a witness. You don't celebrate when you prove it. You just feel that weary satisfaction of alignment the world making the same shape from different angles. And that's the thread you keep holding tonight as you move through these quieter stories, pattern repetition, and the slow defeat of arrogance by paperwork. You start to notice how often criminals misunderstand what investigators do. They think you are looking for a dramatic clue, a bloody glove, a confession letter, a villain monologue. But you are usually looking for a routine interrupted, a light that didn't turn on at dusk, a purchase that didn't happen, a phone that didn't move, a trash bag tied the wrong way, a chair that was placed too carefully. Because the world is a machine of small habits, and crimes are disruptions in that machine. You find them the way you find a jammed gear, by listening for the wrong sound. And the more you work, the more you respect the boring parts. The clerks, the attendants, the neighbors who notice curtains, the people who don't think they're helping solve crimes, but do because they pay attention. Just like that gas station attendant in the Lindbergh case, writing down a license plate as casually as a grocery list, not knowing he was reaching into history. That's the part that lingers, case after case. How often the hinge is small. How often the lock turns with a soft click, not a bang. So when you sit with these files, you don't just see crimes, you see systems. Old systems, like handwritten serial number lists passed between banks. New systems, like camera logs and toll records and store databases. And in every era, the criminal makes the same mistake. They think they can do something